Man, imagine living fast, playing harder, and changing music forever all before the age of 37. That was little Walter. A kid from Louisiana who turned a tiny harmonica into a weapon, a voice, and a revolution. His sound, raw, electric, wild. You could feel the streets, the pain, and the fire in every note he blew. But here's the crazy part. The man who helped define Chicago blues, the one the Rolling Stones and Eric Clapton worshipped, died young, broke, and barely remembered. How could someone so gifted, so ahead of his time, disappear like that? Was it fame, the industry, or his own demons chasing him down? One thing's for sure, little Walter's story is more than blues. It's a lesson in brilliance and heartbreak. Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea. Sit back, and let's start this journey together. He was born Marion Walter Jacobs on the 1st of May, 1930, in Marksville, Louisiana. A place where music was less a luxury and more like air. The streets were dusty, the nights were hot, and the sound of the blues drifted from every corner juke joint. Folks didn't have much, but they had rhythm, they had stories, and little Walter, man, he listened to every one of them. He was just a kid when he realized sound could be his escape. His mama used to hum gospel tunes while working, and he'd sit by the window holding a broken harmonica that someone tossed out. That little thing became his treasure. He'd blow into it for hours, not knowing that one day it would become his voice, the thing that spoke when words failed him. Life in Louisiana wasn't easy for a young black boy in the 1930 era. Poverty, segregation, and violence weren't headlines, they were daily life. Walter saw men work themselves to the bone for pennies. He saw women sing to keep their spirits from breaking. And deep inside, he knew he didn't want to end up the same way. Music wasn't just fun, it was survival. When he was around 12, he started wandering, traveling between small towns, playing on street corners, in bars, wherever someone would toss him a few coins. Some folks said he had the soul of an old man in a boy's body. The way he played, the way he made that harmonica cry, it didn't sound like a kid fooling around. It sounded like someone who'd lived 100 years. By his mid-teens, Walter left home completely. He jumped trains heading north, chasing a dream he couldn't even describe. Chicago was calling the land of opportunity, the city of muddy waters, howlin' wolf, and every great bluesman trying to make a name. But before he got there, he had to survive the road. And man, the road was rough. He busked his way through Mississippi and Arkansas, slept under bridges, and ate whatever he could find. But that harmonica stayed with him through it all. Some nights, he'd sit by a campfire, playing for other travelers. They said the sound would stop you in your tracks, deep, sharp, like a scream wrapped in melody. Even then, little Walter was learning how to turn pain into music. When he finally hit Chicago around 1946, he was only 16. Picture that, a skinny teenager with a harmonica in his pocket and nothing else to his name. Chicago was wild back then. The lights, the smoke, the bars packed with dreamers. Every block had a blues band. Every night had a story. And Walter dove right in. He'd walk up to clubs on the South Side 708 Club, Zanzibar, Teresa's Lounge, and just wait outside. When the band took a break, he'd ask, "Mind if I play a tune?" Most laughed him off at first. But once he started blowing that harp, man, jaws dropped. He wasn't just playing notes. He was bending them, twisting them, making them sound like a human voice. He had this thing, this tone that cut through everything. Soon, older musicians started noticing. They'd let him sit in during sets, and before long, little Walter was playing with some of the biggest blues cats in the city. He was raw, but he had something you couldn't teach feel. You can't fake feel, man. Either you have it or you don't. Around this time, he picked up the nickname Little Walter. Some say it came from his small frame. Others said it was his age. Whatever the reason, the name stuck, and so did that sound. That harmonica wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was an extension of him. He started making a little money, just enough for food and a room. But more than that, he was making noise in the Chicago scene. People began whispering about this young cat who played harmonica like it was plugged into his soul. Walter learned fast. He watched how other musicians carried themselves, how they controlled a crowd. He learned how to read a room, how to make people feel something. And even though he was still just a teenager, there was already something heavy about him, a mix of confidence, pain, and hunger. It was during these early years that Walter crossed paths with Muddy Waters, a meeting that would change his life forever. Muddy had the swagger, the authority, and the following. Walter had the fire, the spark, the unpredictability. When their worlds collided, the blues would never be the same again. But before the fame, before the fights, before the chaos that would define his later years, there was just a boy from Marksville, restless, brilliant, and chasing sound through the streets of Chicago. Man, you could already tell he was different. He didn't just want to play the blues, he wanted to reinvent it. And the crazy part? He was just getting started. When little Walter hit Chicago for real, man, it was like gasoline meeting fire. The city was alive with sound electric guitars, booming bass, and that deep, raw energy of post-war blues. Clubs on the south and west sides were packed every night. People were drinking, dancing, living hard after hard times. And right in the middle of it all was this skinny kid with a harmonica who played like his life depended on it. At first, Walter had to hustle. He'd walk from club to club, waiting for a chance to jump in during someone's break. He wasn't on any payroll. No band would hire him full-time yet. But word started spreading fast. People said, "Yo, there's this kid who can make a harmonica sound like a horn." And that wasn't exaggeration, the man could wail. His sound was big, powerful, something nobody had heard before. He started hanging around Maxwell Street, that open-air market where bluesmen played for tips. If you wanted to prove yourself in Chicago, that's where you did it. Walter would set up with a small amp, plug in his harmonica, and let it rip. The distortion that came from that tiny bullet mic, it changed everything. It was dirty, it was loud, and it cut through the noise like lightning. People stopped in their tracks. Some called it angry music. Others said it was pure genius. Either way, they couldn't ignore him. That street hustle, that's where he built his legend. And soon enough, he caught the attention of the big dogs. Muddy Waters, Jimmy Rogers, Otis Spann. Muddy was already building his empire at Chess Records. He was the king of the Chicago blues scene. When Walter joined Muddy's band around 1948, it was like adding nitro to an already roaring engine. Their chemistry was wild. Muddy's deep, gritty voice laid the foundation, and Walter's harmonica flew over it like a storm. It wasn't background music anymore, it was front and center. Muddy gave Walter the spotlight, something few band leaders would do. And Walter took that opportunity and ran with it. He'd step up to the mic and blow that harp until the crowd went crazy. Man, people had never seen anything like it. He could make that little instrument laugh, cry, scream, all in one song. By 1952, Walter decided to take a risk. He went solo. Most people thought he was out of his mind. Leaving Muddy Waters' band? That was like leaving the throne. But Walter was ambitious. He wanted to lead his own band, to have his own sound. And when he dropped his first single, Juke, everything changed. Juke wasn't just a hit, it was a revolution. That song exploded. It topped the Billboard R&B chart for 8 straight weeks, something no harmonica instrumental had ever done before. It was raw, funky, and it made people move. DJs played it on repeat. Clubs couldn't get enough. Suddenly, little Walter was not just another musician, he was the guy. Juke opened doors. Walter started recording under his own name for Chess Records. His sessions were stacked with top-tier talent, Muddy Waters on guitar, Willie Dixon on bass, Fred Below on drums. Together they created a new sound, modern electric blues. It was sharper, more aggressive, more urban. The sound of Black America in motion. And Walter, man, he looked the part. Slick hair, sharp suits, attitude for days. He was young, cocky, and fearless. He wasn't afraid to show off or talk his talk. That's why people loved him and why some couldn't stand him. He was that dude. Throughout the early 1950 era, he dropped hit after hit. My Babe, Mean Old World, Sad Hours, Off the Wall. His harmonica became the blueprint for generations. He didn't just play notes, he made them speak. Every song felt like a conversation between joy and heartbreak. But behind the swagger, there was always a storm brewing. Walter was intense, man. He didn't know how to turn it off. On stage, he was a genius. Off stage, he was restless, moody, quick-tempered. The fame, the money, the nightlife, it all came fast, too fast. And Walter didn't have anyone to slow him down. Still, those years were golden. He was touring all over, sharing bills with legends. Audiences couldn't believe the sound coming from that harmonica. Rock and roll was just being born, and little Walter was already shaping it without even knowing. He was bending notes, using amps, pushing limits, the same techniques that guitar heroes would later copy. Even his peers admitted it. Muddy Waters once said, "Walter changed the way everybody played." Eric Clapton, years later, called him the most original harmonica player ever. And the Rolling Stones, man, they worshipped his style. You can hear Walter's fingerprints all over early British blues. But you know how it goes, genius often walks side by side with chaos. Walter's ego grew with his fame. He started skipping rehearsals, arguing with club owners, getting into fights. He was young, wild, and living on impulse. That rebellious energy that made him a legend on stage also made him a problem off it. Still, no one could deny his power. When little Walter stepped into a room, you felt it. He wasn't trying to fit in. He was the scene. Every harmonica player after him, from Paul Butterfield to James Cotton, had to measure up against what Walter had done. By the mid-1950 era, he had become the sound of modern blues, loud, electric, unapologetic. But fame came with a price. The crowds loved him, but the industry didn't always pay him what he deserved. Like so many artists of his time, he got the short end of the deal, money missing, royalties gone, promises broken, and slowly, the same fire that drove him to greatness began to burn him from the inside. He was the king of the harmonica, but kings, man, they don't always live long. At that point, nobody could have guessed that the kid from Louisiana who changed the blues would soon be fighting battles he couldn't win. But before the fall, before the heartbreak, little Walter still had one more legendary run left in him, the era that would make him immortal. By the time 1953 rolled around, little Walter wasn't just playing the blues, he was rewriting its rules. The sound of Chicago had officially gone electric, and Walter was its wild heartbeat. He'd walk into Chess Records with that bullet microphone, plug it into a small amp, and suddenly that harmonica didn't sound like a harmonica anymore, it sounded like a guitar, a saxophone, sometimes even like a human scream. It was raw, it was alive, and man, it was dangerous in the best way. Juke had kicked the door open, but Walter didn't stop there. He followed up with Off the Wall, Blues with a Feeling, and Can't Hold Out Much Longer. Every track hit like a punch, tight, sharp, and soaked in emotion. The blues had always been about pain and struggle, but Walter made it sound cool. He brought swagger into sorrow. He made the harmonica sexy. When My Babe dropped in 1955, that was it. Game over. Written by Willie Dixon, produced by Chess, and delivered with Walter's signature growl and fire, My Babe became an anthem. It was confident, defiant, playful, and it crossed over. White audiences loved it, black audiences claimed it, and radio stations couldn't ignore it. For the first time, little Walter was a certified star. You could feel it, the swagger, the fame, the attention. He was on every lineup that mattered, performing in packed clubs across the Midwest. Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf might have been the kings of the stage, but Walter, he was the outlaw prince. He didn't follow rules. He was the rule. He'd show up in tailored suits, shining shoes, cigarette hanging loose from his lips. That harmonica never left his hand. Women adored him, men admired him, and other musicians feared him not because he was mean, but because he was that good. People said, "You can't follow little Walter on stage. You just can't." He started touring heavy with his own band, the Jukes, and his shows were electric. He'd step up to the mic, close his eyes, and let that harp howl. No matter how loud the guitars or drums got, Walter's tone cut through everything. That was his magic. He could make his instrument sound like it was crying, laughing, or begging. And the crowd, man, they ate it up. The money started rolling in. He was buying new cars, fine clothes, the whole deal. But fame wasn't built to last, especially not in that era. The industry was still stacked against black artists. Royalties disappeared, contracts were shady, and exploitation was standard. Walter didn't trust anybody, and honestly, who could blame him? Still, he stayed focused on the music. He kept experimenting with sound. Some nights, he'd show up to jam sessions with new gear, tweaking his tone, cranking the amp louder. He wanted to make the harmonica roar like an electric guitar. And he did. His innovation didn't just influence blues, it laid the groundwork for rock. Decades later, legends like Keith Richards, Eric Clapton, and Mick Jagger would all say it straight. Little Walter was the blueprint. That distorted harp tone became part of the DNA of modern music. He was doing things in 1953 that rock guitarists wouldn't even think of until 1960. But beyond the technique, there was something spiritual in his playing. He could take a simple 12-bar blues and turn it into a sermon. That's why his music hit so deep. It wasn't just skill, it was soul. He played like he was wrestling his demons right there on stage. Even though he was flying high, the cracks were starting to show. The fame, the drinking, the pressure, it all started eating at him. Walter was never the kind of man to back down from anything. If someone disrespected him, he'd fight. If someone underpaid him, he'd walk out. That same fire that made him great also made him dangerous, especially in an industry built on ego. Friends said that around this time, Walter became more unpredictable. Some nights he'd show up late, some nights he'd disappear for days. But when he did show up, he reminded everyone why he was the best. One moment he was laughing, charming, smooth the next. He was in a bar fight. The duality was real. Still, nothing could dim his shine. In those mid-1950 years, Little Walter was untouchable. He was on the radio, on the charts, and in the hearts of everyone who loved the blues. And his peers, even the greats, knew they were witnessing something special. You listen to My Babe today, and it still slaps. It's got that swing, that grit, that confidence that doesn't age. That was Walter in his prime, bold, brilliant, unstoppable. He wasn't chasing trends. He was the trend. But you know how the story goes, man. The higher the climb, the steeper the fall. Fame comes fast, but peace? That's harder to hold. Walter had changed the game, no doubt. But now, he was about to face the darker side of success, jealousy, betrayal, and the weight of his own demons. The spotlight that made him a legend was about to burn too hot, and for a man who lived life on full volume, that heat was deadly. By the late 1950 era, Little Walter had it all: fame, money, women, and respect. But man, success can be a double-edged sword. He was everywhere, but he was also alone. Behind that cool grin and sharp suit was a man who carried pain like a shadow. The same streets that gave him rhythm had also given him scars, and no amount of applause could wash that away. He had become known not just for his sound, but for his temper. Walter didn't take disrespect from anybody, not fans, not bandmates, not even club owners. If someone crossed him, he let them know right away. There were stories of him pulling a knife, smashing bottles, throwing punches after gigs. Chicago's blues circuit was tough, man, and Walter lived like he was always ready for war. Some say that anger came from being misunderstood. He was a perfectionist, obsessed with his sound. If his band missed a beat, he'd snap. If the amp didn't hit just right, he'd lose it. He wanted the music to be flawless, not because he cared about fame, but because he wanted to prove something to the world. They didn't expect much from a poor kid with a harmonica, he once said. So I gave them more than they could handle. But fame didn't come with a manual. The more successful he got, the more isolated he became. Old friends drifted away, record executives took advantage, and jealousy crept in from every side. Even within the Chicago blues scene, tensions grew. Some called him arrogant. Others said he'd lost touch. But those who knew him best understood he wasn't arrogant. He was haunted. Walter's lifestyle got wilder. He drank heavy, stayed up all night, and lived fast every day. He'd show up at Chess Records, eyes red, harmonica in hand, and still deliver fire takes. The producers couldn't believe it. He could record 3 hits in one afternoon and then vanish for a week. Genius doesn't clock in, you know? It burns when it wants to burn. He began experimenting with new sounds, playing with echo chambers, layering harmonicas, even trying to record through broken amps just to get a grittier tone. The man was ahead of his time. Some people thought he was crazy, but in truth, he was building the bridge between blues and rock decades before the world would catch up. Yet, for every musical victory, his personal life unraveled a bit more. He got into more fights, sometimes with strangers, sometimes with people he loved. His reputation turned from blues genius to trouble magnet. Bar owners started hesitating to book him. Police knew his name, and those who used to cheer for him began to whisper instead. Still, when Walter hit the stage, all that chaos melted away. The harmonica became his therapy. You could see it in his face, eyes closed, sweat dripping, body swaying. For those few minutes, the anger was gone. The world disappeared. It was just him and that sound. Nobody could touch him there. But that kind of life takes a toll. His body began showing the damage. The drinking, the fights, the long nights they carved years off him. Photos from the mid-1950 era show a man who looked decades older than his age. Fans would say, "That's a hard 37. His smile was still there, but it was heavier now, like it carried too many memories. Even the people closest to him tried to help. Muddy Waters and Willie Dixon both told him to slow down, to take care of himself. But Walter didn't know how to slow down. He lived by the beat, by the rush, by the crowd's roar. When the music stopped, he didn't know who he was anymore. By 1958, things started to shift. Rock and roll had exploded, and the young audience that once worshipped the blues was now chasing Elvis and Chuck Berry. Chess records focused more on crossover acts. Walter's name wasn't on top of the charts anymore. For the first time, the man who had set the standard started to feel forgotten. And that hurt, man. You could hear it in his later recordings, darker, slower, more reflective. The sparkle was still there, but now it came with pain. Songs like "Everything's Gonna Be All Right" sounded less like confidence and more like prayer. He still performed, still toured, but something had changed. The crowd was smaller, the checks thinner. The same people who once called him a legend now treated him like a has-been. That kind of fall can crush anyone, especially someone who lived for the spotlight. Yet, even in decline, little Walter's brilliance never dimmed. Younger musicians still came to him for advice, hoping to touch even a fraction of his magic. Some nights, he'd take them aside, show them how to bend a note, how to make it cry. He'd smile and say, "You gotta make it talk, man. If it don't talk, it ain't music." He was still that boy from Marksville, deep down, stubborn, passionate, full of sound, but life was catching up fast. The fire that once fueled him was now consuming him, and though the public didn't see it yet, little Walter was standing at the edge of something dangerous, a storm that would soon take him away for good. By the early 1960 era, little Walter's name still carried weight, but the glow had started to fade. The world was changing fast. The blues that once ruled Chicago's nightlife was giving way to the slick, radio-friendly sound of Motown and the wild rebellion of early rock and roll. The spotlight that had once burned so bright on him began to shift elsewhere, and for a man who had lived his whole life under that light, being left in the shadows was torture. Walter was still performing, still trying, but the cracks were showing. He was drinking more, fighting more, and trusting less. The old gang from the chess days had started to drift apart, and new musicians didn't show the same respect. That stung. After all, he had helped build the Chicago sound they were now imitating. But when he tried to remind people who he was, they called him bitter. "You had your time, Walter," they'd say. "Man, imagine hearing that when you invented the very style they're stealing." There were nights when he'd show up at a club half drunk, harmonica in hand, still ready to play. Sometimes he'd light the room up like the old days, fire, groove, and magic. Other nights, he couldn't even finish a set. He'd curse out the sound man, get into arguments, or storm off stage. His legend was turning into a cautionary tale. The streets that had once celebrated him were now filled with whispers. "He's trouble," they said. "He's lost it." But behind all that noise was something sad, a man fighting his own ghosts. The fame, the fast life, the endless nights, it had all taken its toll. The bottle became his closest friend. The harmonica, his only therapy. There were stories, too many, really, of bar fights that ended with someone bleeding, sometimes Walter himself. He had this fierce pride, this need to prove he wasn't washed up. If someone disrespected him, it didn't matter who they were, he'd go off. Once, after a gig, a young musician tried to show off, mocking his playing. Walter just stared, cold as ice, and said, "Boy, don't start a fire you can't put out." A few minutes later, fists flew, and chairs went down. It wasn't that Walter wanted trouble, it's that trouble seemed to follow him. Years of being cheated, copied, and forgotten had hardened him. The same spark that once made him brilliant now made him volatile. He was living like a man who had nothing left to lose. Still, even in the chaos, flashes of genius remained. He'd walk into Chess Records unannounced, harmonica in his pocket, and lay down a track so good it gave producers chills. Songs like Boom Boom, Out Goes the Lights, and Key to the Highway still carried that signature Little Walter punch, that mix of swing, sadness, and swagger. But the magic came less often now. The fire that once roared was flickering. People around him could see it. Muddy Waters, who had always been like an older brother, tried to pull him back in. "Come play with me again, man," Muddy said. "Let's get the band tight." And Walter did for a while. When he and Muddy shared the stage again, something clicked. It was like old times, the chemistry, the groove, the crowd going wild. For a moment, you could almost believe everything was fine again. But it never lasted. Walter would disappear for weeks, sometimes months. He'd pop up in random cities street. Louis, Memphis, Detroit, playing small gigs, getting paid cash, spending it all the same night. Sometimes he didn't even have a place to stay. There were nights he'd crash at a fan's house, harmonica still in his coat pocket, sleeping on the couch like a drifter. He was living fast again, only this time without the fame to back it up. The clubs were smaller, the crowds older. Some nights, people came just to see if the stories were true, if the great Little Walter had really fallen that far. That kind of pity hurts worse than failure. There's a story about him playing a small bar on Chicago's South Side around 1966. The crowd was half empty. He got up, plugged in his amp, and said, "Y'all used to scream when I played. Now you just whisper." Then he started blowing deep, soulful, angry. Halfway through, he broke a reed on his harmonica, but he kept going. Blood ran down his lip, but the man didn't stop. The room was dead silent. That was Walter even when broken. He gave everything, but life kept hitting him harder. The drinking got worse, and his health followed. Friends said he started coughing blood, losing weight, and getting headaches from old injuries. Years of brawls had left scars, not just emotional ones. He'd been hit in the head too many times. But he'd shrug it off and say, "Ain't nothing but the blues, baby." It's heartbreaking, really. Here was a man who'd once set the world on fire, now struggling just to keep the flame alive. He was still in his 30s, but he looked twice that. The face that once lit up the stage now carried every mile of pain he'd traveled. By 1967, the blues world was shifting again. Younger audiences were rediscovering the sound through British rockers like the Rolling Stones and the Yardbirds, artists who worshipped Walter's style. But the man himself? He was barely getting by. The irony was painful. He'd inspired the new wave of musicians, but they were the ones getting rich. Walter would sometimes listen to their records and smile. "That's my sound," he'd say, half proud, half bitter. He wasn't wrong, but by then, he was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being forgotten, tired of chasing something that never loved him back the way he loved it. He still had a few good shows left in him, moments where the old magic came roaring back. The crowd would see flashes of the legend and remember why he mattered. But deep down, everyone could feel it. Little Walter was running out of time. By 1968, Little Walter was a shadow of the man he used to be. The fire was still there, somewhere deep inside, but the world had moved on without him. Rock and soul had taken over the charts, and the blues, the music he helped revolutionize, was fading into the background. The same city that once screamed his name now barely remembered, and for someone like Walter, that kind of silence could be deadly. He still played whenever he could. Small bars, low-paying gigs, anywhere that would have him. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about staying alive. He needed the stage like oxygen. Some nights, he'd light up the room, reminding everyone of who he used to be. But other nights, he looked tired, distracted, and lost. The spark that once made him unstoppable flickered weakly behind those weary eyes. He wasn't even 40, but man, he looked 55. The years of drinking, fighting, and heartbreak had carved deep lines across his face. "That's a hard-looking 37, people would say, shaking their heads. His once slick hair had thinned, his sharp suits now replaced by worn jackets. The legend was fading in plain sight. Those who were close to him said Walter was restless in those final months. He'd talk about starting fresh, maybe recording again, maybe heading south to get clean. But the truth is, the pain was already too deep. He carried too much weight, the regrets, the broken friendships, the bad deals, the what-ifs. Every night, that pain came out through the harmonica. It was the only way he could still talk to the world. Then came that tragic night, January 1968. Walter had just played a small gig on the south side of Chicago. Nothing fancy, just another club, another crowd. After the show, he got into an argument with a man outside. No one really knows what started it. Some say it was over money. Others say it was pride. Whatever it was, things got heated. A punch was thrown. Walter went down. He didn't die right there. He walked away from that fight, bruised but alive. Friends said he laughed it off. "Ain't nothing," he told them. But later that night, back at the room where he was staying, he started feeling dizzy, weak. The damage had been done, another blow to the head, one too many after years of fights. He slipped into unconsciousness and never woke up. On the 15th of February 1968, Marion Walter Jacobs' little Walter was gone, just 37 years old. The man who had changed the sound of the blues, who made the harmonica scream like a guitar, died quietly, far from the spotlight he once commanded. The news barely made headlines. There was no big funeral, no cameras, no record label tributes. The music world kept spinning like nothing happened. He was buried at St. Mary's Cemetery in Country Club Hills, Illinois. For years, his grave went unmarked. No headstone, no plaque, just grass. Can you imagine? A man who inspired legends laid to rest like a stranger. It wasn't until years later that other musicians, including Eric Clapton, reportedly helped fund a proper headstone. Fans finally had a place to visit, to pay respect. But during his lifetime, Walter never got the recognition he deserved. He gave everything to his art, his health, his peace, even his life. And yet, there's something haunting about his story. He never lived long enough to see how much he mattered. He didn't know that the very sounds he created would shape generations, from the Rolling Stones to Led Zeppelin to countless blues and rock players who studied his every note. People often say talent can't save you from yourself. And with little Walter, that hits hard. He was a genius, but also a man fighting demons bigger than fame could ever fix. His life was messy, violent, beautiful, just like the music he made. Sometimes, when you listen to his recordings, that sharp, aching tone, you can feel the whole story in it. The pain, the brilliance, the loneliness. It's not just music, it's his heartbeat, frozen in time. Little Walter didn't get the ending he deserved. But his sound, it never died. It still echoes in every smoky club, every guitar solo, every harmonica cry that dares to sound human. And maybe, just maybe, that's how legends live forever. Even after his death, little Walter's sound refused to fade away. It lived on in the bars of Chicago, in the riffs of every blues band that followed, in the soul of modern music itself. The man might have left the stage too soon, but his echo became immortal. When British musicians in the 1960 era began rediscovering American blues, they found his records raw, electric, untamed. The Rolling Stones studied his phrasing. Eric Clapton listened to his tone over and over, trying to figure out how one man could make a harmonica sound like that. Paul Butterfield, Charlie Musselwhite, and even John Mayall would go on to build entire careers around a sound Walter invented with nothing but a bullet mic and a dream. You can trace his fingerprints everywhere. The distortion he created by accident blowing too hard into that amp on Maxwell Street became the backbone of rock. Every time a guitarist bends a note or pushes an amp to growl, that's Walter's influence. He took the blues out of the cotton fields and dragged it into the modern age, making it louder, meaner, more alive. Over time, people began to realize what they had lost. Documentaries started popping up. Scholars, musicians, and fans began telling his story. The same world that ignored him in death started calling him a genius. He was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame in 1980, and later, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2008, one of the few harmonica players to ever receive that honor. It was decades late, but still, it mattered. The city of Alexandria, Louisiana, his hometown, eventually recognized him too. There's a plaque in his memory, and for several years they held the Little Walter Music Festival celebrating the boy who turned pain into poetry. Local kids who never even heard of him before now learn his name in school, picking up harmonicas just to see if they can make that sound. And of course, Hollywood played its part. In Cadillac Records, 2008, Actor Columbus Short brought Walter's spirit to life, charming, volatile, brilliant, broken. The performance made a new generation ask, who was Little Walter? And that, right there, is legacy when your story outlives your lifetime. Today, every blues jam, every rock solo, every soulful harmonica run owes something to him. He didn't just play music, he changed its language. He showed the world that emotion could be amplified, that sound could be human, that blues wasn't just sadness, it was survival. He may have been underrated in life, but in death, the world finally caught up. And when that harmonica wails, raw and beautiful, you can still feel him there, the restless kid from Louisiana, forever blowing his heart into the night. He was gone too soon, 37 years old, a lifetime packed into a few decades of chaos, brilliance, and sound. Little Walter didn't just play the blues, he became it. Every breath through that harmonica carried the story of a boy from Louisiana who refused to stay small. He turned pain into melody, rage into rhythm, and silence into electricity. Man, when you think about it, how many people can say they changed music forever with nothing but a tiny harmonica? That's wild. But he did it. And the crazy part is, he never even knew how deep his impact would go. Rock, blues, soul, they all owe something to that sound he created, that fire he carried. Sometimes legends don't wear crowns. Sometimes they walk the earth quietly, break a few rules, live too fast, and leave before the world realizes what it had. That was Little Walter. So the next time you hear that haunting harmonica wail, sharp, soulful, untamed, remember the man behind it. The outlaw of the blues, the innovator, the genius who never got his flowers in time. Do you think he got the respect he truly deserved? Because if not, it's up to us to make sure he does now.